Want to stop talking about doing things and actually start getting things done? We're talking about collaboration today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and today I am not joined by my friend and co-host AJ Matthew. AJ is traveling in Central America today, and so we miss him. He'll be back with us next week, which this is just a good reminder that the Malphurs Group is a nonprofit ministry, and all of the work that we do outside of North America, we do at no cost to those churches. And so there are a couple of ways you can support that work. One is simply to donate. Go to malphursgroup.com/donate. If you as an individual or your church would like to support the work that we do, strengthening global churches in revitalization. But a lot of you, we know you already have your missionaries, you already have your set group of things that you support. And so another way that you can support the ministry that we do around the world is actually by helping yourself in subscribing to the Healthy Churches Toolkit. The Healthy Churches Toolkit is the new resource that we launched last week. Thank you so much to those of you who have already signed up and are inside the toolkit and benefiting from that. We're hearing great things from you about how this is really helping your ministry. It's saving you a ton of time. Those of you who are saying, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I'm finally in getting the training that you guys talk about all the time. I'm able to go through this with my team now. The powerful tools that you're using to help streamline your ministry. So we're already hearing great things. So the Healthy Churches Toolkit is just that. It is a resource to streamline your ministry, save you time, and empower your leaders. Inside the toolkit, you'll find our strategic envisioning training, our leadership pipeline design training, our board training. On top of that, you'll find a resource library that's just ready to go with plug and play resources that you can use in your ministry. Things to save you time, like daily social media graphics. If you are a one-man band or you've got a small team and it's hard for you to get stuff posted on social media regularly, and you don't want to have 15,000 subscriptions to other services that are just dedicated to that, we have daily social media graphics that you can download and customize and use right within the Healthy Churches Toolkit, as well as resources to help you to create custom content, resources to help you take your sermon notes and turn that into sermon discussion guides in seconds. All of this inside the toolkit. So go into malphursgroup.com/toolkit. We do have special pricing that ends on October 31st on Halloween or Reformation Day, whatever you're celebrating, at 11:59 p.m. So the spookiest thing happening is that 20% discount going away. So please go to malphursgroup.com/toolkit. Try it 7 days for free. If you try it and you don't like it, you can cancel within 7 days. You don't pay a penny. So go check it out, malphursgroup.com/toolkit. One last thing connected to the toolkit that I want to mention is something that is time specific. Another thing, I guess, that's time specific besides the expiring pricing, which is Thursday, November 7th, we're having our first live monthly workshop. And the focus of this is creating an annual ministry plan. So if you go through the strategic envisioning process and you've got a vision and you've got a mission and you have a clear discipleship pathway, all of that is good. But once you get through that first year, if you were working with us, we would help you build ministry plans for the first year. But a common question we get is, how do we sustain this year after year? How do we make sure we don't just have 1 year of good ideas, but we actually have sustained action? So that's what we're talking about in this workshop, is creating an annual ministry plan so that we can make strategic planning a habit and not just a moment, which is actually something we're going to be talking about in today's episode. So this workshop, it's only for the people who are in the toolkit. So go to malphursgroup.com/toolkit. We're going to be taking you through that live training, as well as releasing some specific tools to help you with this and to develop this further. So this is a good segue, good transition then to our topic for today, which is collaboration and ministry planning. Making plans with your team can be really hard. It can be really, really difficult. And this is a challenge that I encounter quite a bit. One of the things that we get to do on our team is collaborate a lot. in terms of traveling all around the world, working with churches that have different backgrounds. The composition of the team is always unique. The personalities on the teams are always different. And in all of these circumstances, we've got to find a way to work together. And so we've learned a thing or two about how we can create a good system of collaboration and a culture of collaboration. And we're going to break that down today. I'm going to break that down today for you. I think it would first be helpful for us to address the challenges of collaboration. Why is collaboration so hard? Or what stalls teams from talking about doing things and actually getting things done? The first one is time constraints. Time constraints. I have talked about this on the podcast, I think, in other contexts. But one of the, I think, just built-in challenges to church is rhythms. Churches tend to meet, or teams tend to meet at best once a month, if it's a lay team. So if you're talking about a staff team, you're maybe meeting every week, potentially. Although I work with lots of churches that even their staff doesn't meet every week. They meet once a month or something. But definitely if you're talking about a lay team, a committee or a board or a ministry team, whatever, at best they're meeting once a month. And so what tends to happen is you lose momentum between meetings because you get together for a meeting and you talk about what you're going to do, and then it doesn't happen, and then you kind of revive the discussion a month later and go, we really ought to do that, or there's some tension in the room about what a decision should be, so you say, well, let's table this and we'll make a decision next time. Well, next time is a whole nother month. You do that enough times, you really just don't get anywhere, and that's assuming everybody's at the meeting. And then meetings get canceled a lot because they go, well, we need to push this back a week. And then now you pushed it back because those people couldn't be there. And now that you pushed it back, some other people can't be there. And so it gets pushed back again sometimes, or you just go ahead and have the meeting, but the people you really want there aren't there. All of these things cause problems with collaboration. It's hard for everybody to get on the same page because there are time constraints. So we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about how we can address those time constraints. Some of it's just reality we have to learn to work around, but there are some specific things that we can do. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think another challenge to collaboration is that it is easier to talk than to act. That's just the fact. It's easier to talk about problems and even to talk about solutions than it is to implement a solution or to actively address a problem. And so because it's easier to do that, all of the incentive structures are there to just lean into that and continue to talk about issues rather than actually address them and deal with them. So we'll discuss how we deal with that challenge. The third challenge is temperamental differences in approaching conflict. I know we're not talking about conflict, really, we're talking about collaboration. But anytime you get a group of people in the room and you want to start working on an issue, or you want to start working towards a solution to a problem, it's going to create conflict. I was actually just in a meeting not that long ago, and there was some tension in the room around a particular issue. And one of the people in the room said, all of this kind of makes me uncomfortable. I feel like we're creating a division by having this conversation. And what I pointed out to this person was that wasn't the case. When you ask questions and you bring things up, we aren't creating division. We're just lifting up rocks and showing what's there, right? Those grubs, those worms, those bugs were always under the rock. You just couldn't see them. And so when you ask questions and when you get into an environment where you're trying to encourage collaboration and you're trying to work on an issue, you often uncover what people are really thinking about things. And it's easier, sure, I guess it's easier just to put the rock on it and not know what's really there. But we didn't create the situation, we uncovered it. And so depending on the temperaments in the room, this can lead to flourishing or it can lead to destruction. It can lead to division, surely, if you're not good at collaboration, if you don't know what you're doing. So all of that being said, those are the three challenges we're going to address today when we build a culture of collaboration in ministry planning. So let's go back to the first one, this first challenge in time constraints. So the solution to this is to prioritize planning. We need to prioritize planning. And there are a few ways that we can do this. First, we need to set the planning schedule way in advance. We need to know when we're going to have these things. We actually have a previous episode. I'll try to remember to link it in the show notes about creating a strategic planning rhythm or meeting rhythm. Not every meeting needs to be the same. So there are different types of meetings. We have annual things that we ought to do, which is what we're covering in the workshop on November 7th that you should definitely attend, but you can only attend if you're in the toolkit. Go to malforsgroup.com/toolkit. But there's also other kinds of planning. So at least quarterly, we should be looking at our measures in a sincere and deeper way and look at these pillar things that are coming up. Are we making progress towards our goals? Monthly, we should be doing certain types of reviews where we're making tactical adjustments and seeing where are we going. And then if you're talking about a staff team, it can get even more granular than that, where in weekly staff meetings, we're making hyper tactical discussions about where different projects are and what needs to happen. But not every planning meeting is the same. Not every planning meeting has the same agenda or the same scope or the same purpose. But certainly when you're talking about these tentpole meetings, the annual planning meeting and these quarterly reviews of these meetings, or of these plans rather, you need to have those dates set in stone way in advance so that no one can say, oh, I didn't know that this was coming up. So you have to remove that obstacle. You would be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't, by the number of churches I've worked with where this is the obstacle. They tried to pick a date that worked for everyone. They got their list of people first and then tried to pick a date. That never works. Pick the date and then decide who is going to be at the meeting based on their availability for that date. And so if a person can't make that date, then they're not going to be part of the team that's working through that specific challenge. You can't always do that, but that's what you should endeavor to do. Prioritize the planning, pick the date, pick the team for that meeting based on the date. If it's something like your elder team, you're not picking who's on the elder team based on one specific date, but pick the date for that planning meeting way in advance so your elders don't have any excuse for not carving that out and preserving that time. Of course, things happen. And maybe not 100% of people can attend that need to, but you can get really close. What you're trying to avoid is moving meetings, because that communicates to the team that this isn't important. So that would be the next piece of advice within this time constraints issue. The first is set the meeting way in advance so that people are without excuse. And the second piece of advice here is have the meeting even if everyone can't be there. This is something that we emphasize in our implementation process when we work with churches in strategic envisioning. We're going to have the monthly implementation review meeting every month, even if you can't be there. When you start trying to, at the same time, like at a regularly scheduled time, when you start meeting implementation review meetings from month to month, it just communicates that they're not important. And so people will, even if it's at a subconscious level, deprioritize them in their mind, because they'll go, well, if I can't be there, they'll just move it. And then if I can't be there at that, then oh well. So pick a time, communicate it way in advance, have the meeting, no matter if a couple people can't be there, you have the meeting. And then finally, as it relates to time, you have to communicate clearly that we want to make strategic planning a habit and not a moment. That's something that I shared when I was talking about the upcoming workshop that we have. It's one of the goals that we have for this workshop, is to emphasize strategic planning is a habit and not a moment. I think there are certain types or aspects of strategic planning that you wouldn't do every year. You're not going to revisit your mission every year in terms of actually thinking about changing it or updating it. Your vision, probably that's not something, well, there are aspects of your vision you might update annually, or you should, if you're following our process. But the bigger picture vision, what we call vision impact, you're not updating that every year. Your discipleship pathway, you might be evaluating things within the pathway each year. That would be good. The structure of the pathway itself is not going to change every year. Those are things that you might evaluate at a higher level once every 5 or 6 years. But there are certain aspects that should be annual. And there are other aspects, as I already talked about, that should be quarterly, and other aspects that are monthly. And when we create this habit of strategic planning, then it helps people to realize that, oh, this is what we do now. This is a culture of what we're doing, and we aren't just talking about things; we're actually getting things done. So prioritize the planning. So if you're tired of that challenge of time constraints, the only person to blame, really, if I'm being honest, it's you. And the reason why it's your fault is because you planned it last minute, or you were too quick to change the dates because, I was trying to, accommodate this person or that person. It makes it sound like it's just not that important. So pick a date far in advance, stick to the time, and communicate clearly that strategic planning is a habit and not just a moment. All right. The second challenge is that it's easier to talk than to act. Everybody wants to be a decider and no one wants to be a doer. Okay. That's the challenge here. That's the challenge. So how do we address this? Mainly, you have to clearly define roles. You need to clearly define roles. If you're going to be on this team, here is the expectation for what you're going to do. So how do we do this? First, you should abolish any committee that is purely deliberative. There would be maybe some very minor exceptions, and I'll get into those maybe here in just a second. But if we've got a team that is primarily deliberative, meaning they function like a committee in Congress. In Congress, in the U.S. Congress, they have all these committees. They don't actually do anything. They just bring in witnesses and interview them, or they propose policy things, but they actually expect the bureaucracy to effectuate whatever team or whatever decisions that they've made. And I guess that works. It's up for debate as to whether or not that actually works in reality. But that's our system of government, and that's the way that it's set up. Your church should not function this way. You shouldn't have a team that's deliberative, and they're setting policy decisions for it, certainly at the ministry level, and then, it's just up to some other nebulous team to do the work. There are exceptions. A finance team is generally a deliberative body. They're reviewing the budget, they're reviewing what's happening, and they're making decisions about how you should or should not spend money. And then it is up to the ministry teams, which function in this case kind of like the bureaucracy, right, to effectuate those policies or those principles or those ideas. So that would be an exception. To some degree, the elders, the senior level leadership of the church, is a little bit of a deliberative body, in that certainly we expect them to be able to teach. We expect them to be caring pastorally. So they aren't a totally useless deliberative group. They're doing actual work. But I don't want them getting into the detail weeds work of every ministry level. Like, I don't want them, that they ought not be the ones who are actually doing all of the maintenance. They should not be the ones who are actually leading all of your small groups. So I guess in one sense, they have a maybe 65-35 deliberative to action ratio, because there needs to be some group that is looking at things at a high level and creating vision, and then their job is to push that vision down to the lower levels and to supervise and to oversee. That's the term, overseer, right? Yeah, that's their role, is to oversee and to effectuate that policy from the top down. And if they're too far into the weeds at the granular level, they're not going to be able to do that. So those would be maybe my two exceptions. Would be an elder team that is like 65-35 deliberative to action ratio, so that they can effectuate change down to the lowest levels. And a finance team, which is reviewing financial and fiscal policy, how money is being spent, how things are coming in and coming out, and then making decisions about how best to steward those resources. But they probably aren't the people who are actually doing the spending of the money within particular ministries. That's happening at the staff level or at the ministry team level. So those are my carve-outs for deliberative groups. Every other team that you have, the women's ministry committee, the adult discipleship committee, you name it, first impressions committee, I don't really care. Whatever, any other group besides my exceptions that I've carved out shouldn't be deliberative. They should be action oriented. So you gotta abolish any committee that is purely deliberative, minus my carve outs that I've created for you there. And the way that you can abolish these deliberative functions, and to revise them or relaunch them, sometimes churches will go, well, we don't have committees, we have teams. And I've said this before too, but it doesn't matter what you call it. It matters what they do. So if you call it a team, but they still act in this deliberative way, you don't have a team. You still have just a committee that you call a team. If you want a real team, they have to do real work together. So the way that you can do this, you need to create position descriptions for team members that outline expected behaviors, actions, and time commitments. So you say, okay, we're going to have a meeting once a month, or we're going to have a meeting once a quarter, whatever that meeting schedule is. So that goes back to prioritizing, planning. And then between meetings, you are going to do X, Y, Z thing. And you need to have that written down in a position description or a job description so that everybody knows when they join the team what is expected of them. Oh, it's not just me coming to these meetings. I'm also going to have to do these things. Now, the great news for you is we have a ton of job description templates inside the Healthy Churches Toolkit. So if you go to malfersgroup.com/toolkit and get into the resource library, you'll find many, many, many sample job descriptions that you can plug and play and use. These are really helpful for helping you transition those teams from deliberative bodies to action bodies. But this has to be really, really clear that if you are on the team or the committee, whatever you call it, you are committing to doing this work. And we're committed to doing this work together. And that people who don't pull their weight, people who don't do the work, aren't going to be on the team for very long. There's accountability there. We hold one another accountable and go, hey, why hasn't this been happening, or why isn't this done? So that's why when we, in our strategic envisioning process, one of the things that we use is a monthly implementation review form. And we use that form as the template for the meeting itself. And it's specifically asking these questions. What have we gotten done? What's at risk? What's possibly falling behind? What do we need help with? And so that we're structuring the whole meeting around action, not around talking about what we would like to see somebody else do. So the first challenge that we dealt with is time constraints. You address this by prioritizing, planning, putting the dates on the calendar, and enforcing them. Secondly, the second challenge is people just want to talk, they don't want to do. So the solution to this is to clearly define roles, abolish, with some exceptions, any group that is purely deliberative, and install teams that actually get work done, and everybody who's on the team understands that they exist to get things done between the meetings. And then finally, the last challenge is temperamental differences in approaching conflict. So when you try to collaborate, you tend to uncover conflict. That's the reality. And so how do we address this final challenge? And the answer is we need to preserve clear lines of communication. It's just about managing the communication within the team really well. And I know that sounds simplistic, but the reality is that it is simple, but it's really hard to do. Baking a cake is simple, but if it were easy, everyone would do it. I think that there are a lot of things in life that are not complicated. They're simple, but they're still really hard. And I'll freely admit, this is something that I continue to work on. And as many times as I've done the strategic envisioning process, every piece of advice that I'm about to give you is something that I continue to try and work on and refine and improve in. Even though it's simple advice, it's hard to do, especially depending on your temperament. So clear communication is the solution to the differences in temperament, managing that when you're trying to collaborate. So senior leaders should set the expectations for the meeting, but be the last to share their opinion. So here's what I mean. One of the things that we do when we in the strategic envisioning process is we define what we mean by consensus. We say we are going to operate by consensus in this process. And we define consensus as 100% of people feeling 80% good about a decision. We're not trying to get to 100% feeling 100% good. That's a target that's unlikely to be possible to hit. But can you feel 80% good about a decision? Can we get everybody there? And in terms of our expectations, we expect that if you aren't there, that you will speak up, that you will say something. This is your chance. You don't get to say boo about it afterwards. if you disagreed. So if you weren't at 80%, and then you just kind of went along with the decision just so that we wouldn't have to keep talking, but then later on, you're saying something else about it, you're going on and on about it, that's a quick way to not being on the team anymore, because we don't allow that. Everyone is allowed to say exactly what they're thinking, exactly what they're feeling, without there being a problem, right? In the meeting, you want open dialogue and discussion. But once a decision's been made, we're moving forward as if we were all unanimous in that decision. So the senior leader needs to set that expectation at the front end and say, this is what I expect. I expect everyone to feel and to have the permission to speak their mind in this meeting. But once we've made a decision, you don't get to, hamstring this decision or try to undercut it if you have a disagreement. But senior leaders should be the last to share their opinion, because senior leaders have such sway over the room that once the senior leader says something or shares their opinion, it chills the room. It chills discussion. And that isn't the senior leader's fault. It's just a functional reality of the position, of positional leadership. Because there is some reality here that if we make a decision and it's something that goes against the senior leader and what they say, how effective is this decision going to be? Because if he can't support it, or if he doesn't support it, or if he thinks it's a bad idea, how much traction is this ever going to get without his support? And so I think it's really important for the senior leader in the room to allow discussion to happen and encourage discussion to happen. And you need to hear what people are saying. You need to have an openness of heart and a receptivity to what other people are saying. Hear it clearly, and only then respond with wisdom, because you have to know whatever you say counts 3 times or 4 times as much as what anybody else says. Even though we're saying everybody's on an equal playing field, you can't escape that positional authority that you have, even if you want to. So be the last to share an opinion on an issue, depending on how people are wired. Some people don't mind pushing back against the senior leader. They live for it. Other people would never. So you don't know whose opinion you might be chilling if you speak too soon. So be sure you try to speak last. The second piece of advice here that I would tell you if you're trying to deal with these temperamental differences is to be comfortable with silence. And this is maybe a thing that I've definitely improved in over the years, but it's still a challenge for me. And I have to tell myself, be okay. You're okay with silence. You are okay with silence. But when we're addressing a difficult topic, just shutting up, and stopping talking, and let there be silence in the room. And that's an okay thing, because that silence then creates a doorway for someone who's maybe less likely to speak up to actually say something. And then finally, I would say intentionally engage people who are temperamentally not to speak. So if you know someone is quiet or they're conflict averse, ask them their opinion. Don't just wait for them to share their opinion. If you've got, Jill is in the room and Jill is quiet, Jill doesn't say much, say, Jill, I'm curious, what are you thinking on this issue? And invite Jill's opinion. And that's your role as the senior leader in the room, is to invite that. Another great way to include those voices in ways that maybe they're temperamentally not inclined to speak up is to break people into smaller groups. So this is something that we do a lot in the strategic envisioning process, as we pair up or we go into smaller subgroups, because it's much harder to hide. If we've got 12 or 15 people in a room, it's easy for the quiet people to never say anything. But if I break them into pairs, they have to talk to that person. Or if I even put them in a group of 3, they're much more likely to speak up. So a great way to include those quieter voices is to divide the group up into subgroups where they're going to have to do work and they're going to have to speak up. And so their voice is heard and their voice is shared. And that makes sure that all of the best ideas are being communicated, because the reason why you invited them into this meeting or to this team is because you treasure their perspective. If you didn't really want to hear what they had to say, you wouldn't have invited them to be on the team. And so it's up to you then as the senior leader to be sure that that voice is being heard and that it's speaking into the process, even if their temperament maybe holds them back from being effusive and speaking a lot in the group itself. So those would be my pieces of advice for building a culture of collaboration and making sure that stuff actually gets done. We don't just talk about stuff. Let me recap briefly for us. Our 3 challenges are that there are time constraints. There are that it's easy, and the solution to that is prioritize planning, set dates way in advance, and enforce the meetings no matter what. The second challenge is it's easier to talk than to act, and people want to be deciders. They don't want to be doers. The solution to this is to essentially abolish any group besides my carve-outs that are primarily deliberative and create teams that are centered around action. And you do this by clearly defining roles. Create position descriptions so that everyone knows exactly what they're getting into and what is expected of them when they join the team. And then finally, the third and final challenge is, what do we do about conflict and the temperamental differences of certain people wanting to speak up and other people wanting to just be quiet when the discussion gets intense? And the solution here is to preserve clear lines of communication, set the stage as the senior leader, and then shut your mouth and let people talk. Break them up into groups if you have to, and be comfortable with silence at times, which allows an opportunity and a doorway for other people to start speaking, and then speak last into the situation after you've heard the voices that need to be heard. If you'll do these things, you're going to start to build a culture of collaboration in your church, and you're going to see a lot of great things start to happen. This has been episode 264 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. You can read the article that goes along with today's episode at malfirstgroup.com/264. And if you haven't heard it yet, be sure you go to malfirstgroup.com/toolkit to get 20% off of our pricing through October 30th. That ends at 11:59 p.m. October 31st. Get 7 days for free. If you cancel, you won't get charged a penny. So go to malfirstgroup.com/toolkit. If you have questions, let me know. Love you guys. We'll see you next week. AJ will be back with me next week. See you then.